My dad his life mirrors mine perfectly. It has these extreme highs and extreme lows, and the lows are due to addiction. My father never had a personal relationship with Jesus until the very end of his life, you know. When I was like 9 years old, my older brother moved in with us. He was 17 at that time. My mother and him got into an argument, and he was out drinking. A couple nights later and was T-boned in an accident, and he passed away. And then my dad completely. I'm going to juvenile hall and getting out. My dad, who I hadn't heard from in quite some time, he sought me out because my mother had contacted him like, your son's out of control, we got to do something. And my dad was still getting high, but he had got himself a house, and he took me in. We started getting high together. You know, I had never dabbled with meth. It had only been weed at that time, but I started dabbling with meth because that was my dad's drug of choice. We had one thing that we shared in common, you know, and so at that time I think drugs were kind of my God,
right?
You know, and that lifestyle around the guys that did that.
Gotcha.
And I ended up getting hooked on that. I went to county jail many times. I was given programs, ankle monitors, drug court. My dad and I were kind of on the rocks. He was using, I was using again, and he ended up taking his life November 23rd of 2020. And I found him. I looking back, there was a lot of warning signs that were taking place that I just wasn't in a headspace. I was completely out of my mind, and I didn't even really realize I was in jail, or obviously the severity of what was going on with my life. You know, that I was looking at 20 to life was my first. As I started to come out of it, somewhere in my delusion, they had moved a cellmate in my cell, and as I started to come out of it, I would hear this guy, and I wouldn't talk to him, but I'd hear him praying at night, and I'd see him sitting by the window using the light at night to read his Bible, and I was disgusted. No, I didn't want to be in there. The last thing I want to hear about is God. So I went and talked to the COs and asked them, can you move me out of that cell, because it's going to be a problem. I'm going to end up beating him up, or he's going to beat me up or something. They were like, no, you're going to have to hash it out. You know, we can't just do anything. The next month or so, kind of trying to pour into me, but I wouldn't hear much of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then one night I'm sitting there and I hear him invite somebody. I'm roll over on my rack and I hear him invite somebody into our cell. He'd never done that before, and he was talking to somebody, and I was catching, I wasn't familiar with the story, but I was catching bits and pieces of what he was talking about, and I started to get a little interested. So when that guy left the cell, I asked him, you know, can you tell me that story? And so he started to tell me the story of Jacob. That's my middle name. And I'd never heard that story before, that he was a man that wrestled with God, and that he had struggles to understand God or do God's will for his life. And later on, he was given the name Israel. I told him why I could relate to it so well. He had told me, the Holy Spirit had already told me that. That's why I told you that story. You know, that's why I brought that guy into the cell to say that in front of him. I found myself here, and I know he's been every step of the way. He's been opening those doors for me, doors that I couldn't open myself, you know. I pled to a lesser offense, and I was sent to Bill Johnson's, and I hoped that I was gonna make parole, you know.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't gonna let anything get in the way that was gonna change that. And so that was my goal. I wanted to make parole, and but in my mind, I wasn't totally convinced that it was gonna take place for me. I never had so many good things. First off, with the time going away that I was gonna be doing, and now I'm in this prison. I spent the last year and a half preparing myself to be at a really hard prison with some violent offenders and stuff. I hadn't prepared yet, you know, for that. I didn't think it was gonna happen that fast. They said 8 to 10 weeks, and it was 4, you know. So I wasn't prepared. And as I'm sitting there, I'm sitting and talking at a desk just like you and I are. And at that exact moment, B&H interviews were going on in the next room over. And so she said, you know, if you're going to Tulsa, this company that's doing interviews in there, and I got all excited, like, yeah, I'll interview for him. She's like, oh, you can't interview today because you didn't turn in your paper in time, but here's an application. I'll go hand this to them before they leave, and when you get out, you call them, you let them know. So, okay, so I filled out the application. She walked in there to hand it to you and Ronnie Beller, and I'm sitting there and filling out an Oxford House application, and the next thing I know, she's like, are you ready to interview? I was okay. So I went in there and I'm like, hi, shake your guys' hands, and Ronnie said, the Holy Spirit told me that I needed to make room for your interview today. So I called you.
Right.
I have your card still from that interview. I called you, and you said, "Where are you?" And I told you where I was, and within 10 minutes, James Schumann pulled up in a B&H van and picked me up and said, "We're going to the Sober Living," and we pulled up at the Jesus First Transformation home, and the way he was talking to me on the way there, this company's so great, it's done all these things for so many people, and I started to get a feel for it. I got in the house, I met, I got Curtis Kelly and Terry Poe, and I met a lot of guys that, poured into me, gave me some inspiration.
You felt a family atmosphere.
Absolutely. James Schumann and I and another couple guys are going to be going in there ministering to guys.
That's awesome.
I think they're all holding up and waiting so that I can get my 2 years to go in there and start ministering to guys, and a couple of other guys that work here.
I appreciate you taking the time this morning to do this, and I want you to know I love you, and I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
I'm proud of you. I mean, this is going to be used to change lives.